Hello, this is Edna White. I am so glad you're with me today. Today, we're going to talk about, is your family toxic? And we know that it's holiday time, and this is when we really figure it out, or actually go through it and then go through it again. Because it's Thanksgiving, then it's Christmas, and then if it's really toxic, you say, "Why did I go in January?" Then you set these goals. Oh, I'm not going to deal with them. I'm not going to do that. But then relent because you really want to have a family and I guess association, a camaraderie with people that are your family members. So, how do you know that it might be time to cut them out of your life? Some lucky people are born into families they love spending time with. There's close bonds that make the holidays and the multi generational vacations a drama free joy. But there's others. Simply seeing an incoming call from a parent kind of triggers anxiety that dates way back into childhood, right? And they leave a family gathering feeling hurt, angry, and exhausted. Toxic family dynamics can have a far reaching impact in our lives as adults. With that being said, it can be tricky to recognize when you're in a toxic situation because you become so familiar with it, it's just the norm or just the way it's supposed to be. And even trickier to figure out how to navigate it. Do you go to the dinner and you see someone who you know is toxic? Do you go around and start talking to somebody else? Or do you just don't say anything? So here are some signs of toxic family members and, and some expert advice on dealing with toxic families because drink all the wine is not a sustainable plan. Take them all in because they are your family is not a sustainable plan. Some family members play the blame game. That's one of the biggest signs is the inability to take any kind of accountability. A parent, a sibling, or other family members may often place blame for anything that's wrong on someone else, you included. So if we start blaming other people or start to talk about other things instead of going back and saying, "Hey, this is me. This is what I did to make this happen," or, "Well, my mom did this. Mommy did this, and this is why I had to do that." Or my cousin was always this, and this is why I had to do that. Or my husband did this, and this is what. Take accountability. That's when you know. That's the red flag. Well, and then start saying something else. Or you did. Red flag, red flag. They lack accountability. Now, that's rooted in an attempt to displace and offload somebody's shame or bad feeling about themselves. It's the way that they offload it to somebody else, and they don't want to say, "I feel ashamed because, yes, I did do that," and take accountability. And they don't apologize. The ability to apologize, to own your stuff, is a hallmark sign of a healthy family system. Period. You don't have to take that you didn't. It was my mother's fault. It was my father's fault. It was my cousin's fault. It was my great grandmother's fault. You don't have to take that. I don't like this. And you have a conversation with them. I don't like that. And if it starts to do that, then it's time to cut them out. Number two, here we go. They're masters of passive aggressive. If anything that gets under my skin is that passive aggressive common sign This includes, well, I don't have to talk to you anymore, or backhanded compliments. Oh, you cooked this well today. Or subtle jabs and digs that no one in a room actually calls out. I'm the queen of this or that. Or I made this, I can really cook. It can even be a nonverbal, like rolling your eyes, or a disapproving sign, or no one has known you longer than your family, okay? Which means they have a rich back catalog of personal failures to draw on from when you're commenting about something in your life. They go back in the catalog and say, "Oh, remember this?" Even if they insist they're just teasing another passive aggressive, those comments, maybe subconsciously or not, be degrading to you. And they're designed to do that to you. 3, they use fear, obligation, or guilt. One of my clients often struggle when parents use the concept of fear, obligation, and guilt, fog, right? So they try to get their child to act a certain way. Well, you wouldn't have known if I would have just died. You wouldn't know because you don't come visit me. That is manipulation and it's a bad behavior and can be very intimidating to you, threatening you with punishment of knowing that your parent is going to die because you didn't call, or guilting you into saying something or doing something. For instance, you're not a good kid if you don't do this. And that goes way back from when you were a little kid, you know? So, well, um, good kids don't cry. Good kids do their homework. Good kids come home and do what their mother tells them. Good kids do. All of those little limiting thoughts come back to haunt you when you're older. Being subject to these sorts of tactics can make you feel hopeless and powerless and full of dread. And by design, you can make or say something you're uncomfortable with. You can say, okay, I'll call you and know you're lying and then you don't do it and bad feelings start all over again. So it becomes a cycle of lying. Do you know this kind of passive aggressive behavior can make people lie to you? And that gets them caught up in a cycle. Cut it out with the passive aggressive. Cut it out. Cut the fear, obligation, and guilt out. Passive aggressive behavior out. Get rid of it. Let's see what number 4. They ignore boundaries. When you set healthy boundaries, that's crucial for you in healthy relationships, right? For example, please don't call me at work, right? But a family member goes past that and calls you at work. Now, not even an emergency, just something silly to ask you. That means that they're challenging who you are. And it's total disrespect. It's a blatant show of disrespect to your boundary. Think about that. 5, they gaslight you. Now, we hear this buzzword everywhere, right? And I know this buzzword was inspired in 1944, believe it or not, by Ingrid Bergman from the film Gaslight. Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse in which someone causes the victim to doubt their own understanding of reality. You really didn't see that. That really didn't happen. I know that was told to me several times when I was young. In other words, your family will deny that any abuse is actually happening. Or that didn't really happen like that. That's one of the great words too. Whether it's a sibling insisting your childhood experiences weren't as bad as you remember, or someone point blank saying that didn't happen. You're making things up as usual. Red flag. This is where being a community, fostering healthy relationships with people, and finding a therapist is very important. It's not until someone really mirrors that gaslighting back to you that you can hear that it's not an appropriate response. And if you're doing it, definitely is not appropriate response. They use threats, harsh language, and violence. That's another one, number 6. This may seem like the most obvious sign of toxic relationship, but not if it's always been normalized as part of your family dynamic. There's never a situation in which name calling, even subtly, like you're stupid, a-hole, dummy, you're going to be bad at this, or you're just like your dad, or all of that stuff is name calling, or physical intimidation. They're forms of domestic violence, and they're not justified. If you don't feel safe being who you are, being where you are, when you are, you're not in a great space. You're in a toxic relationship. 7, the psychological impact. Dysfunctional family dynamics warp your whole sense of self-worth. If you grow up in a dysfunctional and continuous family like this dynamic, it can feed these beliefs that you aren't good enough, or that people don't really love or care for you and never will. Listen, what I found that a lot of people disregard that part, that I acknowledge that. If you ever want to get well and get out of any of these situations, especially a toxic family dynamic, you have to acknowledge that there is a toxic, environment, that these people are toxic. You may have some fear in the beginning to say something to them. That's okay. But until you acknowledge it and stop glossing over it and stop shouting over it and stop, you know, um, pretending over it and stuff, all those things, you're never going to heal that. It's never going to hit. Never. And you're never going to be your true self. You ever felt like that you're contained and confined in a certain time? You can't go this way, can't go that way, can't go. You're just confined into this way of living. It's because you have not addressed any of the toxicity and got real with it and said, this was toxic. I will no longer accept this for myself and those that are coming after me. I will admit it and be open about having a conversation about it. This is when you truly, right, start to get the impact of toxicity out of your life. And then you might even start to find relationships that are just dysfunctional because you have been brought up in a space that's dysfunctional. You might find partners who treat you the same way, sometimes even look like the things that you didn't want, or even demonstrate the qualities of that dysfunctionalism because it's so familiar. That's why you have to acknowledge it so you don't continue to repeat it. And listen, let me tell you something. People and relationships are not what are supposed to get you out of happiness. They're just not. You're responsible for that. So let's just get that out. Okay? Because I've been wanting to say that. People are not your source of happiness. You are. So I talked about recognizing the dysfunction, and it can be hard, especially in the absence of physical or financial abuse, right? you recognize the relationship is dysfunctional. But a huge effective tool is getting more in touch with your body. Your body is going to say things that it's been saying for years, but you weren't listening. It's going to say I didn't like that. Heart flutter. It's going to it's going to show up in your neck. This doesn't feel good. I don't actually want to go to the family. Neck and pain in your head, right? Instead of suppressing or repressing, not suppressing, repressing or ignoring it, get in touch with that sensation of your body. There's a tightness in your chest. You can't breathe well, or you're physically shaking while you're on the phone with whomever it is. Take a note, acknowledge it, recognize it. Now, how to be slippery, how to get out of that. Some parents or family members are constantly looking to bait you into the conflict with hurtful words. They're always baiting you. You heard of the bait and switch, right? Someone comes to you and says, I got this great person, come, da, 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 all these great things. And then said, come, they want you to connect with them at this address, right? Slippery, right? That's slippery actions. In other words, practicing short, evasive, and non-committal responses to these upsetting comments is the best way you can deal with this. Even just something like, that's interesting, or cool, that works, right? Anything where you're not getting caught up in the friction. Notice that it's not an attempt to change anyone else's behavior, but rather control your own. Because we're so busy listening to respond and listening to control every time. So when is it time to repair and when is it time to let go? It's hard to do that. It's a big decision. And it's hard to cut off any contact of the loved ones, even when certain situations require it, especially when previous attempts to improve relationships are unsuccessful. It can be hard. But you have to draw a non-contact line. Because especially if it's physical, financial, or emotional abuse, at that point, no contact is probably necessary. But it does have to be a decision you come to on your own, or simply you won't stick to it. But you have to stick to it. If you say it, deciding to enforce a non-contact rule is a big move that may test your resolve. Call for a new family tradition. I've done that in many occasions. Spur other family members to try and intervene. It's certainly not the sole option for every turbulent family bond. Let's not get that. Every family doesn't have the same, solution, but you can find options. But it also doesn't have to be a permanent, especially because dysfunctional family systems can be repaired. Sometimes there needs to be a third party, whether it's a trusted community member or a family therapist that you can connect with. Um, Toxic families can get swept away in actually sticking to these dysfunctional habits. But you want to be able to repair in order to move on. And the last thing I want to say to you, radical acceptance. If you don't want to entirely cut off your family, that's important. Not only to manage your expectations, but to radically be honest with yourself and about who your family is. The biggest piece of acceptance is just that. We're not looking to go there and change the system. Instead, we're just trying to get through the day. It's certainly not easy, but radically accepting allows you to be present in the moment of joy that can go from family to family and cycle to cycle. Rather than be angry and resentful or trying to get to your parents or siblings to change, you can start with yourself and accept that. I hope today that I said something that will help you in learning what your family dynamics are in a toxic family. See you next time, and thanks so much for watching.